wrote a song that was recorded by the country artist Tim McGraw. Even if country music's not your thing, you might be familiar with this song because it won the Grammy for Best Song of the Year and has sold over 2 million copies. It is called Live Like You Were Dying. And I included the lyrics in today's bulletin on the back page. And we'll actually hear that song performed by Macajo at the conclusion of this message. Tim and Craig once talked about the inspiration for this song. One morning, as they were discussing potential song ideas, they began swapping stories about friends and relatives they had who had a common experience, and that was being diagnosed or sometimes misdiagnosed with a life-threatening illness. For instance, Craig had an uncle who was told he had a rare form of leukemia, and it was untreatable. So the uncle then went to the Mayo Clinic to get a second opinion, where they told him, in fact, he had been misdiagnosed. It turns out he did not have a death sentence at all, but a very treatable condition. So what did the uncle do? He immediately quit his job, took off for Belize for an extended vacation, and went shark diving. Now, not all of us want to go shark diving in Belize, but that impulse to think about what we've done and what we've left undone is pretty universal. At least when we start taking seriously the truth that everyone's time on Earth comes with an expiration date. On the one hand, we all know perfectly well that life is short and precious. It's full of wonderful experiences that are right at our fingertips. We all know that at a basic level that our most important relationships deserve our close attention. So that knowledge is what can compel us to prioritize living fully. On the other hand, all of our good intentions to live that way can get derailed very easily. Time itself has a sneaky habit of tricking us into not noticing how quickly time is flying by. One day just flows right into the next, and the little things that so often catch our attention and it seems so vitally important in the moment, those things can pull us away from the big picture perspective of how we are spending the time that we have. I once heard someone put it this way: think back to what was going on in your life 1 year ago, or even 6 months ago. What was the one thing that was causing you the most worry, the most stress? What was occupying your thoughts or keeping you up at night? The thing to consider is what actually happened with that thing that was keeping you up. In hindsight, did it truly turn out to be worth losing any sleep over? Was it really worth all the time and effort and energy you spent being so concerned and so anxious? Maybe, but maybe not. Now, in the past few years, we collectively have had plenty of concerns. When the COVID pandemic struck, we were justifiably anxious and afraid, especially those several months and beyond. We lost loved ones, many people lost their jobs, and that concern continues for those with vulnerable immune systems and their families. And people are still suffering the effects of long COVID. The state of politics in our country has deprived many of us of sleep. Just the daily drumbeat of news focuses so much on what divides us, not on what we have in common, because conflict, not peace, is what gets our attention. Social media only pours fuel on the fire of our divisions, making it seem as if we're on a very scary precipice with no solutions. It can be a helpless sort of feeling, and I don't need to tell you, it's genuinely concerning. So I don't want to minimize any of our anxieties or suggest that they don't matter. They do. But that said, on a day in, day out basis, we can so easily become consumed by something that ratchets up our anxiety. Only later, though, with the gift of hindsight, do we grasp that that something was soon replaced by yet another anxiety-producing thing the next day or the next week or the next month. Now, if that's true, if those day-to-day things that vacuum up our time and our focus and our energy are only doing just that, and if we do have a finite amount of time available to us, then we have to ask, what are we not spending our time on? What is being robbed here? So the challenge seems to be being able to know in the moment what really matters in the big scheme of things. That's the trick, if we can pull it off. But when we're right in the thick of it, how do we know? Well, I've learned that one way to answer that question is to ask myself, am I living today as if I am dying? Now, if that sounds morbid at all, it's really not, because it's not about focusing on death. It's about focusing on life. Being okay with the fact that no one lives forever and that we have a limited amount of time on the planet should lead us to value the time that we have to live and to do the most with that time that we possibly can, to prioritize what matters, to pull back and ask, is this really how I should be spending my time? Craig Wiseman also spoke about an encounter he had after his song had become a massive hit. A colleague approached him one day and said there was a particular lyric in this song that changed her life. She described how she had not spoken with her father in 15 years. But there was a line in the song that kept haunting her, and it goes, I gave forgiveness that I had been denying. It woke her up to her deep need to forgive her father for their falling out without demanding that he seek forgiveness first. And she said that as a result of that lyric, she reached out to her dad, began a dialogue with him, and they rebuilt their relationship. Music can be that powerful. Craig Wiseman also said the point of the song is to get busy living, to understand just how brief and precious life is, to not waste the time we have, and to not live with regrets. Now, I understand live like you were dying might sound like a trite and hokey motto to some, but for those of us who've been through the death of someone we loved, it resonates. At least it resonates with me. For anyone who's reached a point in life where you wonder where all your time has gone, it resonates. Or if you suddenly realize that your love for that parent or that child or that friend that you have cut off matters so much more in the big scheme of things than the hurt that's driven you apart, it resonates. So who cares? Who cares if it's hokey? It's real. We all know that time is not something we ever get back, and that this life is not a trial run, it is the actual race. I have attended and I have led hundreds of funerals, and the deepest sorrow and grief is always expressed by those who never reconciled with the person who died. Now, a huge part of their grief is regret. They understand that the wounded pride they clung to out of principle was ultimately useless and foolish, but we just seem to have this knack for accumulating our hurts as if they're trophies on a wall, as if that's ever going to matter to anyone else but us. Forgiveness and reconciliation are never easy because it's always risky to seek those things, but the perspective of living like we're dying, that makes any risk worth taking. Now, when the Apostle Paul wrote to the members of the early Christian church in the Greek city of Corinth, he encouraged them to adopt that same point of view, in their lives as individuals and in their lives together as a church. It's one of the overarching themes of his first letter to the Corinthians, and it crops up again and again in this simple phrase in our passage today. Even though in principle, these folks believed in a life where all their hurts and sorrows would be transformed into wholeness and peace, apparently they were not living as if that was true. They were hanging on to old ways of being that felt safer and more conventional and more comfortable, so they were not risking or they were not exploring and they were not living fully. Even in a church community built on the concept that everyone is equally loved and cherished by God, they fell into these factions of resentment and envy and feeling put upon and diminished by the very people who love them most. There's a lot of drama, a lot of anxiety and hurt going around that church community when they should have been living joyfully together. So in our passage today, Paul reminds them again that it is high time for them to stop wasting their lives on what does not matter and to focus on living, to appreciate what he calls this appointed time. Because this appointed time is all we have to make any kind of positive difference. So he says the present form of the world is passing away, which can be taken to mean the old order of things is about to be replaced by the coming of Christ. The predominant worldview of the early Christians was fixated on a future where God's kingdom would arrive in some kind of big, splashy, cataclysmic way where all things would be made right. And that worldview, as we know, continues to be the way many of our fellow Christians see the future. Just to be clear, we don't exactly share that worldview. But even in those early days of Christianity, I believe Paul could see a problem with an apocalyptic understanding of the future. The problem is this. While those Christians were waiting for something wonderful to happen in the future, in the present, they were not really living in ways that reflected the gift of God's life and the gift of God's love. Waiting for God to judge and punish the people that you decide are sinful and unworthy is not exactly conducive to accepting and welcoming and loving all people as Jesus did over and over again in his lifetime. I believe Paul was also saying that time is always moving and always changing the way things have been. With every second that ticks by, that is a new moment of creation. And that moment, each moment, is filled with possibilities that we should not squander. It's a present. It's the present in terms of being right now, this very moment, that kind of present. And it's a present because it is a gift. It's a gift. Coming of Christ into the world is not a future big and splashy cataclysmic event. No, it's an event that happens right here and now in every present moment, in this appointed time. It's in this appointed time when we can forgive and seek forgiveness. It's in this appointed time when we can feed the hungry. That's when and that's how Christ comes into the world through you and through me every day. It's in this appointed time when we can invite people to join our cause as a church of serving and loving our neighbors with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's in this amazing appointed time when we can heal the divisions that plague our culture and be champions of understanding and sanity. When we can be a powerful force for good, for God's sake, yes, but also for goodness sake. As a little kid, my parents would let me stay up late and listen to the countdown on New Year's Eve coming from Times Square. I'm old enough to remember the Guy Lombardo Orchestra playing live from the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center, waiting to break into Auld Lang Syne at the stroke of midnight. As the clock ticked down, I remember feeling sorry for those last seconds of the old year, because all of those moments, they were just being treated as they were disposable. Just something to get past before setting off all the fireworks and cheering and hopefully getting a big kiss when the clock struck midnight. And now I wonder how many days we regularly spend like that, waiting for the next thing, as if the moments that we have are somehow disposable, that they don't really matter. And in those moments that are ticking by, how many of them did we spend on the anxieties and fears and struggles that in 6 months or a year from now we'll look back on as not really worth it? How often do we delay telling ourselves that we have plenty of time until we take that risk, until we mend that broken fence, until we say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, until we give ourselves away in love? And then even until we take that shark diving trip to Belize. We all have time, but this is our time, our appointed time, to live like we were dying.
He said I was in my early 40s with a lot of life before me when a moment came and stopped me on a dime. I spent most of the next days looking at the x-rays, talking about the options and talking about sweet times. I asked him when it set in that this really might be the end. How'd it hit you when you get that kind of news? Man, what'd you do? He said, I went scouting, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 stints on a bull named Fu Manchu. And I loved deeper and I spoke sweeter and I gave forgiveness I'd been denying. He said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. He said, I was finally the husband. Most of the time I wasn't. And I became a friend would like to have. And all of a sudden, going fishing wasn't such an imposition. And I went 3 times that year, I lost my dad. Well, I finally read the good book and I took a good long hard look at what I'd do if I could do it all again. And then I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. And I know deeper and I spoke sweeter and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. He said, one day I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. Like tomorrow was a gift. You got eternity to think about what you do with it. What could you do with it? What would I do with it? What would I do with it? Sky, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a barefoot shoe. I love deeper and I spoke sweeter and I watching as it was flying. He said, one day I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. To live like you were dying. To live like you were dying. Yeah.